there it is. You're ready.
Okay. So you won't need your books for this particular one. These are just archaeological evidences that help give the Bible credit and show that it can be a reliable historical document, if you will. These are some of my favorite things. So I think we'll have enough time to get through everything. I didn't put too many on here. I just wanted to start off with this, is that archaeology, it can't prove the Bible, but it can help corroborate the historical accuracy of it. This is just a mosaic that was found that has several different scenes from the Bible, some weird things too, but so the first one is the city of Jericho. The city of Jericho, when it was first discovered, actually had a portion of the wall that was still standing that had one home in it. It's no longer there, unfortunately. It's been destroyed by some people coming and taking bits and pieces of everything, but it does corroborate the story of Rahab in the Old Testament. The city also shows significant damage from collapsed walls and fire, which also corroborates the biblical story of the fall of Jericho. And another part of it, there was never another city built on top of it. And that's one of the things that it mentions also. So this is called the Merenptah stele. Merenptah is Ramses II's son. He's actually the 13th son of Ramses II. This is called the Israel stele. At one time, it was the oldest known mention of Israel outside of the Bible. This was erected around 1210 BC by Merenptah, detailing a battle between Egypt and other countries. The inscription says that, and we'll look at the inscription on the next slide, but the inscription altogether says, Israel is laid waste, its seed is no more. And this shows, so a lot of people think that Ramses II was the Pharaoh of the Exodus. This shows he could not have been, because it shows that Israel was already an established nation. Okay, so this, stand up. You read hieroglyphs from right to left. So this is from here to the bird is the name of Israel. And then the two people on the end, that's what denotes that it's a people group. It's a nation, not just a tribe. And so this, when Michael and I were in Cairo, we went to the Egyptian Museum, and this was like the only thing I really wanted to see. And if we go back, you can see down here, this area of the stone, which you can't see because there's reflection, is where it's at, is where the name is at. But it is a significantly different color because people come and touch it and kiss it, and they put some plastic over it to help protect it. But that stele is about 10 feet tall, about 6 feet wide. And so it's pretty impressive to see, and just to know, like, some of the things that we think are inaccurate, but it also does help lead credence to the stories in the Bible. So we do know, because there were, for a time, people didn't believe that Israel was even mentioned anywhere outside of Canaan. And so we have several references that we'll get to where it is mentioned, especially here in Egypt. This is the Isaiah seal and the Hezekiah bulla. Both were found at the base of the southern wall on the Temple Mount. I don't know why it got off. It wasn't off a little bit ago. This says Yesha Yehu is Isaiah. So if the Hebrew letter Aleph stood in the place of the missing letter that's up on the left-hand corner where it's kind of broken. Then the word after Isaiah was spelled prophet. In 2015, only 10 feet away, the team found this bulla, the clay impression bearing King Hezekiah's seal. And according to the Bible, the prophet Isaiah served during Hezekiah's reign and interacted directly with the king. The archaeological layer containing both of these, the Hezekiah bulla and the Isaiah clay seal, occurs below Byzantine and early Roman debris, and this matches the biblical time of Hezekiah's reign, which lasted from approximately 729 to 687 BC. So these two artifacts found together confirm the fact that those Old Testament figures really lived at the time that the Bible said they did.
The Temple Mount, can you tell me about that?
The Temple Mount in Jerusalem is where the I'm trying to think of what's there now to give you the picture of it. It's the Islamic, it's not temple. What am I thinking? What are they called?
Mosque.
Moss.
Oh, I can't think. You'll have to help me out. With the golden dome. I cannot remember its name, but it's where the temple once stood, or they believe it once stood. There's actually another location that they think it might have been too. We won't even go to that. But it's a very sacred site for Jews, Muslims, and Christians. Okay, this is the Sergius Paulus inscription. In Acts 13, we read of how Saul and Barnabas set off on a missionary journey to the islands of Cyprus. Upon arriving at Paphos, they met the proconsul Sergius Paulus, leading him to faith in Christ. And this has his name on it. And this was found on the island of Cyprus in 1877. The Pool of Siloam. This was actually a recent discovery. I know it's almost been 20 years, but in archaeology, that's really recent. In John 9, Jesus heals a blind man by making blood and applying it to his eyes and telling him to go wash in the Pool of Siloam. And there had been, previous to this location being found, there had been about 2 or 3 other sites they thought could have been this, but there are inscriptions and things around the site that lead credence to the fact that this is the actual Pool of Siloam. We might get through this faster than I thought. I'm going fast. This is the Caiaphas Ossuary. This one is inscribed with the name Joseph, son of Caiaphas, and inside this box were the bones of 6 people, including those of a 60-year-old man, which scholars do believe are the remains of Caiaphas himself. Caiaphas was the high priest who presided over the trial of Jesus in Matthew 26, Luke 3, John 11. The ancient historian Josephus records that Caiaphas' full name was Joseph Caiaphas, and that he held this role from AD 18 through 36, and that's from his Jewish Antiquities. And this was discovered in 1990. And for a while, they thought it was a fraud, but they have since proven that it is authentic.
So is it pretty like the size of a casket, maybe?
No,
for 6 people?
ossuaries are probably this big. You know the skull and crossbones on pirate ships? That symbol of the skull and crossbones comes from when they would open ossuaries, because they would cross their arm bones and put their head right in the middle. And so they're big enough
And you could get
to
6
hold,
people in there.
depending on how big there are different sized ones, but mostly, I mean, when they would lay the body out in the 1st century, it would decompose, turn to bone, and they would put the bones a certain way within the box. So it was big enough to hold it about. They're not big. They're not like, what.
But there were 6 people found in that.
Mhm.
Okay.
But you gotta think, when there were, and it may not be 6 full people. It didn't have, it could just be,
That's what I'm
It just
thinking. I'm
says-
thinking that's gotta be a big
it
box.
just has the bones of 6 people, so they were able to identify 6 different people within it. I
I'm
don't
just thinking
know.
6 skulls would take up what that looks like right there.
You'd be surprised. You'd be surprised.
Are there digs going on around in Jerusalem and Israel all the time now? Just constant digs.
There's a lot of, I mean, and they have seasons. So there's times when they can dig and times when they can't. But yeah, I mean, they're always finding new stuff. The Temple Mount is very hard to dig on. When Islam came in and took over, they would not allow anyone to dig underneath the Temple Mount. So a lot, like the seals that they found were actually found in a bunch of rubble that was discarded when they were digging. And so they were able, archaeologists were able to come and dig through all of the rubble that they were throwing out, and they actually found a whole bunch of stuff in it. And they're actually still sifting through a lot of it, from what I understand. This is the pool of Bethsaida. And this is the site of Jesus healing the paralyzed man in John 5. So this is a place where the ill and disabled would congregate. These were considered healing centers, and they were actually dedicated to pagan gods. And so they would drink and bathe in the waters and then sleep within the temple walls. So one of the things that I always thought was really interesting about this is Jesus is entering this pagan site and kind of taking hold of it for himself with this specific instance. Because nobody else was getting healed there, but Jesus walked in and did it right in front of everybody. So you imagine that had to have been pretty powerful to see. And this specific site was discovered in 1888. This is the Pilate stone, and the stone mentions Pontius Pilate, the prefect of Rome and the province of Judea from AD 26 to 36. It was discovered at an archaeological site of Caesarea Maritima in 1961. And the inscription says Tiberium Pontius Pilate, prefect of Judah. And now the Tiberium, I just put that in, that's not on there, what's in parentheses. It's just indicating a building that was used for the temple worship to the Emperor Tiberius. That's what Tiberium means. Oh, let's see if I get, I think his name is Yehohanan. He was a crucifixion victim. This was found in 1968 in an ossuary. He had been crucified. This is his right heel bone with an iron spike through it. Prior to this discovery, there was only evidence of crucifixion with ropes to hang people on crosses. So a lot of people didn't think that Jesus was hung on the cross with nails until they found this. And since then, they have found another crucifixion victim with a nail through one of his bones. And this is actually dated to the late 20s AD, not 1920s, like 020. So just a little bit before Jesus would have been crucified.
That had to be painful.
This is the Larish Stone. This is in Egypt. This stone describes the parting of the sea and the plague of darkness. And actually, there's a lot to it, because this is about 4 feet tall, 2.5 feet wide. So there's a lot of script on it. But if you line up the Torah and the beginning of the book of Exodus with the first 5 lines of the Larish Stone, you get a glimpse into the backroom politics of the Exodus. So you get an understanding of the climate that led up to the Exodus that we don't get in the Bible. And this was discovered in 1887. And this artifact is not a well-known one. It was actually kind of in a back storeroom for a long time at a museum until an archaeologist found it and brought it out, and it's still not very well known. but
So
now you know.
does this stone have writing all over it that you just can't see?
All over
from
the
this
outside,
photo?
the back, the sides, yes, yeah, and it's on hieroglyphs. This is the Elba tablets. And they're in cuneiform. This was found in 1974, 1975. And this confirms the existence of Abraham and David. It also confirms the existence of biblical places such as Sodom and Gomorrah. And another thing that it helps confirm is biblical words such as them, not them, but them, which means the deep. And that particular word was thought to have developed at a much later time than this is dated to. Which linguistically is important, just showing how old the Hebrew language is.
Well, people try to say that people's way back when didn't even intend it.
Well, it's interesting because I think I had a conversation, we had a conversation last week. There's a lot of proof that the ancient Israelites were literate and could write. And so, and on a wide scale, not just the priests, not just scribes, but on a wide scale. Because you find a lot of pottery shards that are, like our sticky notes today, just handwritten in ancient Hebrew. And they're obviously, I mean, they're coming just from people's homes. So there's a lot of evidence that they were, but one of the things when you're looking at any ancient artifact, you have to realize there's at least two views. One that wants to confirm what it is, and the other one that wants to disprove what that one confirms. So you kind of have to sit back and take it all in and say, okay, how does this, you have to be able to eliminate the truth from, because there are archaeologists out there who will do whatever they can to disprove anything biblical. Like you could show them, I don't know, you could show them Jesus's blood on something that was glowing and they'd be like, that's not Jesus, So you have to take that into, that's obviously not real, but something undeniable, and they will do what they can to disprove it and call it a fake or whatever. So you'll see if you ever research a lot of this, you will see a lot of that. But everything that I'm showing you today has a lot of backing to prove that these things are from historians, from archaeologists. And there are archaeologists who aren't Christians, are not Jewish, but they will look at things and go, well, this corroborates what the Bible says. They're not looking to prove the Bible, they're just looking to find accurate history. And that's kind of what I look for, is both sides. Because there are a lot of things that have been found and I'm like, oh, that would be awesome if it was true, but there's just not enough evidence to show it's true. This is Sinach Arabs Annals. This describes the Assyrian king Sennacherib's siege of Jerusalem in 701 BC during the reign of King Hezekiah. This was discovered in 1830 in Nineveh, and it's dated to about 690 BC. The thing I like about a lot of these is because they are directly connected to the Bible, but they're not, if that makes sense. It's not Sennacherib is not, he's not one of the Israelite kings. So almost everybody will say this is authentic. When you get to biblical things, you find a lot more objection, which I think is really interesting, and it kind of makes me just want to jump on board with everything. I'm like, well, if they're saying no, it's probably right.
Mhm.
But I do like these because they corroborate the Bible from an outside perspective. This is called Bar Youssef, and it's the Joseph Canal, and it runs from the Fayum in the delta of Egypt almost all the way to the bottom. I tried to find it when we were over there, but it was way further away from anything that we went to. This canal runs through Egypt, and it's believed to have been built by Joseph, and they still think that today. And it was, they believe, built to help relieve the pains of the 7-year drought. And this was believed to have been built in the Middle Kingdom within Egypt's 12th dynasty, which is where a lot of people will place Joseph and the early Israelites are within that 12th dynasty. This is the Shasu of Yahweh name ring. And this was found at the Temple of Siloam in Egypt. I'll just read this whole thing. The Exodus account makes it clear in Exodus 5:2 that the Pharaoh had never heard of Israel's God Yahweh. Yet, at an ancient temple of Siloam in modern Sudan, an inscription from Pharaoh Amenhotep III, who's more than 100 years before Ramses II, lists enemies of Egypt. One of those enemies is the Shasu nomads of Yahweh. And this is the oldest known inscription to use the name Yahweh. Before it was the Maranpatah stele, and then they found this. And this does show that after the Exodus, Israel's God was no longer unknown to Pharaoh. So again, leading credence to the fact that it couldn't be Ramses II, who was the Pharaoh of the Exodus. This is called the Brooklyn Papyrus. It's, even though it's kind of in pieces, it is very important for Old Testament as far as like the Exodus and pre-Exodus, because for the longest time, we know that the pyramids were not built by slaves. So for the longest time, everybody assumed if the Israelites were in Egypt, they would have been where the pyramids were. So there was no evidence of that time. And they've been able to pretty much prove that the pyramids were not built by slaves. But this does show in the Middle Kingdom, again, that there is evidence of Semitic settlements all across the Northeast Nile Delta. And they actually do have proof all the way to the south of Egypt of Semitic names popping up in different papyrus. This lists about 100 names of slaves from one Egyptian household, the majority being Semitic names, including the biblical forms of names like Sapphira, Asher, and Issachar. And this kind of shows you where those are in that papyrus.
So
This is in the
100
Brooklyn
slaves
Museum.
in one household.
Mhm.
Wow.
It would have been a very wealthy household.
Yes.
Now, were you saying that people thought the Israelites built the pyramids, but now they.
People assumed that that was it, but then we know that they weren't. So they were trying to discredit the Bible by saying, we know that the pyramids were not built by slaves, which there's hundreds of pyramids throughout Egypt. So why they focused on those, I don't know. But this shows that outside of there, and even down into Luxor, there are papyrus that have lists of names and Semitic names pop up all through.
So they were slaves.
They were. This proves that they were slaves. Mm-hmm. And so that's what they were trying to do, is they were like, we know that the pyramids were not built by slaves, because there are papyrus that detail how it was built. And if you go to Egypt, there's a whole town they built. I mean, the people lived there for 40 plus years building these pyramids. And they lived a really nice lifestyle if they were building it, so that they knew that they weren't slaves. And they tried to use that to disprove the Bible, but this proves in all throughout Egypt, this one and some others, that there were slaves all throughout Egypt that were Semitic slaves.
So they were or were not involved in building some of the pyramids.
I don't think
mean,
that they
if
would
they were-
have been at all. I mean, the
No.
pyramids are much older.
Okay.
The pyramids come from like the second and third dynasty, and we're talking 12th, 13th dynasties here. So
Okay.
this is the Berlin pedestal inscription. This is actually, well, I'm going back. This is now the oldest mention of the name Israel. So we have 3 in this list. The Berlin pedestal includes a set of name rings, each associated with the depiction of a bound prisoner. So this You can see the guy they've got his hands behind his back tied. So this is showing that they conquered these different nations. And the one on the very far right that's broken, that's the one that has the name of Israel in it. And this is around a century prior to Ramses II. So if the Israelites were established in the Canaan area at that time, the Exodus would have happened at least 40 years before this point. So this is actually really new. The Middle Saul house at Avaris. Avaris is up in the Delta. It is what they now believe is the land of Goshen. This house is an Israelite palace in the land of Goshen. It originally had 12 pillars and 12 graves, and of course, that's only really significant for Israel. One of the graves here was a pyramid tomb with a statue of an Israelite, and he actually had a throw stick on his shoulder, but he also had a multicolored coat. And his statue, he had a statue built of him inside of it, which was about twice the size of a normal human being. So it would have been commissioned by a pharaoh. So most historians and archaeologists do believe that this was the tomb of Joseph. They never found any bones inside of it, which also leaves credence to the story that they picked up his bones and took them with him. Because in Egypt, the only thing you find in most tombs are bones. So it's almost unheard of to not find bones or traces of bones in a tomb in Egypt. They'll strip all of the grave goods, the gold, anything that they can sell and make money off of. They never take the bones. So there's a really cool, there's a lot to this that I would love to get into. One other thing about this town is they have been able to show that it started with about 40 people, 40 to 200 people. By the time they have been able to show that everyone packed up and left at one time, by the time they left, the population was around 2 million people.
Whoa. And they all left.
So these are my favorite two things, these last ones. This is the mummy of Amenhotep II. There are two likely candidates for the Pharaoh of the Exodus. He is one of them. They're all in the same dynasty. They're all out of the 18th dynasty, which is where we get Hatshepsut, Akhenaten, and the famous King Tut. I like both of these. I haven't been able to decide which one I think is most likely yet, because there is really good evidence to support both of these. So Amenhotep II, he is the Pharaoh right before Tutmosis III. One thing I learned when I was in Egypt, you have Moses, you have Tutmosis, you have a whole bunch of Moseses in a family. And that word in Egyptian, I know that in Hebrew, they say Moses means draw out of the water. In Hebrew, it means the son of. So one thing I learned when I was in Egypt is they now call these Moseses, they'll say Tutmos or Tut or Amos, because they do not want it to sound like it has any connection with Moses himself at all. But it would make a lot of sense that Moses would come from a family who calls themselves with a Moses tagline. Now he comes before Hatshepsut. Hatshepsut is a queen. She became Pharaoh. Her mortuary temple was destroyed. Everything about her was destroyed. And they believe it was destroyed because she is the princess who drew Moses out of the water. And she brought the calamity to Egypt. This is Tutmosis III. She comes right after Hatshepsut. Hatshepsut actually, he was the successor. He was about 3 years old when it was time for him to become king and she stepped in as regent and took over. They think he's the one that destroyed everything. But what's interesting is 2 generations past this, so his grandson is Akhenaten. And if you know, Akhenaten is called the heretic king. He took Egypt from being a pantheon of gods to worshiping one God. To me, that's the biggest evidence that one of these 2 men is the Pharaoh of the Exodus, because since the establishment of Egypt, it's been a pantheon of God. And I mean, you go through Egypt and it's not just here's a church. I mean, these temples are massive. And people died for these sorts of things. He took it from all of that to worshiping the Aten, one God. So there had to have been something in his past that was affected him enough to make that transition in the middle of his reign. I think.
That one was around Joseph's time, or?
No, these would have been Moses' time. These would have been the time of the Exodus. These are the 2 most likely candidates, in my opinion. And there's a lot written on these 2 as well, but they're most likely the 2 that would have been the Pharaoh of the Exodus. Of course, they've seen better days.
Yeah.
But I just find it fascinating because one of these 2 people could possibly be, you could be looking at the face of the king of the Exodus. And there's a lot to help with these theories that they could be. So it's really interesting, at least for me, to study and look at and think one of those men could be that. And with Amenhotep II, well, and both of them have their first sons died. That's one of the things that they have in common. And so someone else was the successor, which also is like the very last plague. I think that's it. Yeah, so there was a whole lot more I thought about putting in, but I was like, I don't know if I'll have the time. But those are some of my favorite things. And one of the cool things about biblical archaeology or Egyptian archaeology is they're literally finding stuff every day. So you never know what's going to